and welcome back to She Investigates, the podcast where we investigate all things weird. I'm your host, Gwen Ross, and today I have a story for you about a woman who literally threw a farewell dinner party for her boyfriend before murdering him. But first, let's catch up. So this last weekend, we did family pictures, which we haven't done in a while. My parents are actually leaving to go on a mission for our church for 2 years. And so we wanted to make sure that we got pictures taken before they get back because the grandkids are all going to be older. And we actually have one grandkid that will be graduated from high school. So we wanted to make sure that we got pictures taken before they left. And I had honestly forgotten about how much goes into preparing for family pictures. And I probably stress more than most people, but I think every person in my family, except for my youngest, I bought multiple outfits for because I was so stressed about making sure everybody looked good together and there wasn't too much of one color. And it was just a thing. I just spent my whole week shopping for outfits and it went really good. It was funny though, because Cooper, we haven't done family pictures for just our family for 4 years. And I hate that because I love having family pictures, even though it's kind of a pain to get them done. I actually really love having them. So we haven't done them for a couple years. Cooper was really little last time we did them. And after every single picture that we took, he said, "Are we done? Is that all of the pictures? Are they finished?" But I think that they turned out really good. I'm really excited. We have to wait a couple of weeks before we're going to be able to see them. But yeah, it was good. I'm excited to have some cute family pictures again. I also wanted to talk about TV shows that we're currently watching. I know I've talked about that a little bit before, but we're watching some different things now. We just finished Cobra Kai, which is just so perfectly nostalgic and cheesy. If you are a kid that grew up in the 80s or 90s watching Karate Kid, it was so great. We loved it. There was a couple times where me and Patrick looked at each other and were like, this is so cheesy. But overall, we loved it. And the show's actually over now. This was the last season, but the last episode was just perfect and tied everything up so nicely. I love when that happens and we're not left with wanting more. So highly recommend that. And now we are watching season 2 of the show Sprint, which is all about professional track athletes. And they are preparing for the Paris Olympics that of course have already happened. But like I talked about last week, my husband is a track coach. So we love watching these track athletes. He does throwers and these are obviously sprinters because it's called Sprint. But we've just loved watching them prepare and seeing the process that they go through. It's just been fascinating and so fun. It's also kind of fun because we already know the outcome. We already know who wins the medals and all that stuff. So definitely put that on your list of shows to watch. I don't know if you guys do this, but me and Patrick, we keep a running list of shows in my phone to watch so that we don't ever get into a show hole where we have nothing to watch and we're sad. So I wanted to ask you guys if you have any that you guys are loving that you think that we should watch, specifically more for me and Patrick to watch together. I have plenty of shows that I just watch on my own, but it's a little bit harder to find shows that both me and Patrick enjoy together. So if you have any that you and your spouse have enjoyed watching together, please let me know so we can add them to our list. And then we also just finished the Karen Read documentary that's on Hulu. I think it's called A Body in the Snow, The Trial of Karen Read. And it was wild, you guys. I don't know if you know the story. I'm actually not going to cover it on here because I feel like every true crime podcast has covered it. It's just been covered to death. But I would recommend going and watching the documentary because me and Patrick just went back and forth through the whole show if she was guilty or not the whole time. And I feel like there's evidence that could go both ways. My biggest thing is that I feel like she's just so unlikable. And that doesn't necessarily make her a murderer, but it's really hard to root for her and to try to separate her personality from the details of the case because she's just so easy to not like. I also thought that it was really weird in the documentary that like people have gotten so invested in her case. Like people were outside the courthouse with signs, cheering. And it was so weird to me that these people that like don't even know like Karen Reed and her boyfriend in real life were so invested in this that that's how they like chose to spend their time. But then I realized here I am recording a true crime podcast just because I'm interested in true crime. So I guess I can't really blame them that much. But if you haven't heard the story, highly recommend the documentary. I think it's only 3 or 4 parts, so it's really quick to binge through it. And with that, let's jump into today's case. Today, we are going to Australia in 1997, and the capital city of Canberra was, on the surface, a quiet and orderly place. There was government workers, students, families, all just going about their lives. But beneath one rooftop in a suburban neighborhood, something deeply disturbing was about to unfold. A young man would lose his life, slowly, agonizingly, and in the strangest of circumstances, not in a robbery, not in a random act of violence, but during a dinner party, and at the hands, or rather the mind, of someone he trusted most. This is the story of Joe Cinque, a case that has haunted Australia for decades, not only because of the murder itself, but because of the questions that it leaves behind. Questions about responsibility, mental illness, complicity, and even justice. And I have to warn you guys before we get into this that this case is probably going to infuriate you because it definitely infuriated me. And yeah, just prepare yourselves. So Joe Cinque was 26 years old. He was born to Maria and Nino Cinque, and the two of them were both Italian immigrants to Australia. He was young, handsome, and he was an engineer with a warm smile and an easygoing charm. He was kind, thoughtful, and he was adored by his family and friends. He had one brother named Anthony, and his family was very tight-knit. They were a very close family. I'm picturing just like this vibrant, boisterous Italian family since his parents were Italian immigrants. And they lived in Newcastle, which is about 105 miles from Sydney. They were the kind of family that they had dinner every night, talked about their day. They were kind of just this idyllic family. Joe loved sports like soccer, cricket, and tennis. He was very social and extroverted, and just an all-around kind person. Not only that, he was a good student. He got good grades, and he graduated with his engineering degree in November of 1994. After he graduated, he decided to travel Europe for 2 months, and upon his return, he got a job at a civil engineering firm where his dad and his grandpa all worked at. So he basically had his whole life ahead of him, and he'd even found somebody to share it with. And that someone was Anu Singh. He went out clubbing with some friends one night, and that is where he met Anu. Anu was a law student. She was also smart like Joe, and she was studying at the Australian National University. She was charismatic, also very outgoing. She was born in India, and her parents were both doctors who had immigrated to Sydney in 1972 when Anu was just a baby. She had attended a Catholic high school in Sydney, and she was just a happy-go-lucky person. But also, underneath the surface, she was kind of troubled. She had an obsession with her appearance, a fixation on illness, and she had a growing paranoia that the people around her were trying to control her. Not only that, before she met Joe, she had been in a previous relationship with a man named Simon, and she actually ended up getting pregnant. And she chose to terminate that pregnancy. This was a pretty traumatic experience for her. She went back to school, but she missed Sydney, she missed her family, and she was calling her parents upwards of 15 times a day. She also had gotten into recreational drug use. She started off just using weed in 1994, but by 1996, she was using cocaine, acid, speed, ecstasy, and meth. And this was actually causing her some hallucinations. So she had a lot going on. And since she was struggling so much, she decided that she was going to take a semester off and return to Sydney to be with her family, kind of get her life together. And that's when she met Joe in the club. When she met Joe, she was still in a relationship with Simon. So after a while, she's feeling better. She decided to go back to school, and her and Joe continued a long-distance relationship, which Simon found out about. And rightly so, he ended the relationship with Anu, and by 1996, Joe and Anu were pretty serious. He would visit her on the weekends, which it was a 5-hour drive from where he lived to where she was at, and he would make that drive every weekend just to see her. Now, Anu was also having some health issues, and Joe was a very attentive boyfriend. If she would call and was feeling sick, he would drop everything to go down and take care of her. They seemed to be in a very happy relationship. But Joe's parents didn't really like Anu. They felt like the relationship had changed their son. They felt like Anu was controlling. They felt like she overshadowed their son whenever they were together. After Anu and Joe started dating, she started calling him during their family dinners every night, taking him away from their family. So in September of 1996, Joe actually moved to Canberra to be with Anu. And they had a little townhouse that was super close to the university where Anu was attending. Joe and Anu even set up a joint bank account named Joe and Anu's wedding account. So things were getting pretty serious. Anu had stopped taking some of the heavier drugs that she'd been taking, and she was having some bad symptoms of withdrawal. She had also developed an eating disorder named bulimia, and she had lost a ton of weight. She just had a very warped perception of how she looked. Her parents had tried to convince her to seek help, but she refused. She'd actually even tried to convince her dad to pay for liposuction, which, like I said, she'd lost a ton of weight and was very thin at this point and did not need liposuction. She was also feeling weak, achy, and she said she felt like things were crawling under her skin. And she started to believe that her muscles were gone, that they'd just been like eaten away somehow under her skin. So she went to a doctor, and he told her that there was nothing wrong with her and that all of the symptoms that she was experiencing were purely psychological. But Anu, of course, didn't believe him. She knew that her body had problems. Like, she was experiencing this and feeling this. This was very real to her. And she even convinced herself that she had AIDS. She told her friends that she had AIDS, and she didn't think that it was fair that Joe didn't have AIDS as well. So she had planned to put some infected blood on his toothbrush. How messed up is that? Like, I don't know. This girl has some issues. But after she got an AIDS test, it came back negative. So next, she convinced herself that she had multiple sclerosis. She's basically at this point like a full-blown hypochondriac. So eventually, her parents convinced her that she needed to see a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist tried to prescribe medication for her to help her with these feelings that she was having. But she refused to take the medication, and then she refused to go to any more appointments. Her parents even called the mental health crisis line many times. But since she wasn't considered a danger to herself or to others, they couldn't admit her. Joe supported her through all of this, and she started to think that her symptoms were related to ipecac syrup, which she had taken a lot of because it helped to induce vomiting. And like I said, she was bulimic, and she was using this to induce vomiting after she ate. And she believed that Joe was to blame for this because he had mentioned in some previous conversation about this syrup randomly, and that led to her looking into it and starting to take it. And then she blamed Joe for introducing her to the syrup. It was all his fault. She also blamed him for other health issues, even though he'd only tried to take care of her and help her through it. And that's where this story starts to kind of veer into something a little bit darker. Anu Singh had told friends that she was planning to take her own life. And not only that, she wanted to kill Joe as well and take him with her. She was convinced that he was the reason for a lot of her problems. And she spoke about suicide with kind of this theatrical detachment of how she would do it, when she would do it, and even how she would notify her parents. She spoke about these elaborate plans that she had, and it was really hard for her friends to know how serious she was. She had a friend named Medhavi, who basically this friend was like a doormat to her, and she would do whatever Anu told her to do. And her and Anu began studying in the library together suicide and assisted suicide methods. The mind-blowing thing to me is that several people knew about these plans. She had told them that she was going to sedate Joe and kill him and then kill herself. And they knew that she was planning this overdose. And these were intelligent law students. Like, they knew what was going on, and yet nobody said a word. In fact, some of these students actually sympathized with her and told her, if that's what you want to do, then you should do it. That is so crazy to me. The fact that she was sick, I think, helped them to justify it. Nobody tried to talk her out of it. Nobody told her family, warned Joe, or even called the police. And by August 1997, Anu had begun selling her clothing for really cheap and giving away her CDs. This concerned her parents enough to call the dean to see if she'd been going to class, but they couldn't give any information to her parents because Anu is an adult. So they tried to submit an application to the mental health crisis team to have Anu admitted without her permission. But these applications, they're not just like a quick, you get it done and it happens. It's a lengthy process. So there was nothing that they could do but wait. Anu and her friend Medhavi actually spoke to another friend, which they called Mr. T. And this was somebody that Anu had met in one of her classes, and they asked if he could get her a gun. He initially thought that it was a joke, despite her continuing to ask him to get her this gun. She told him that she was sick and she wanted to end her own life. Now, it was unclear in all of the research that I did how the plans somehow got changed, but it was somehow decided between them that an overdose of heroin would be a better method of suicide. And a few days later, Anu and Medhavi went to his house to get the heroin. He claimed that it was going to be quick and painless and that it would only take about $50 to $100 worth of heroin to get the job done. Anu initially didn't have the money for the drugs, but she called him a few days later and wanted to get a half gram of heroin. So Anu and Medhavi paid him $250, and then he injected himself and Anu and Medhavi with heroin. And this was kind of like to teach them, to demonstrate how to inject the heroin and how to inject somebody else. Anu saw a counselor at the university in September, and she claimed that Joe was abusing her emotionally and physically. She said she couldn't leave because she was emotionally and financially dependent on him, and all of that was actually later proved to be false. In October, Anu went back to Mr. T a few weeks later, and she wanted to buy $500 worth of heroin, which is a full gram. So he loaded these 2 syringes up for her and asked her why she wanted so much heroin. And she said, someone else is coming with me. She told him he didn't need to know who it was, and he didn't press. Medhavi helped Anu obtain some Rohypnol tablets, which it's better known as like a roofie or the date rape drug. They got it off of another classmate, and this classmate got them 15 Rohypnol tablets and told them that if they were going to use it with heroin, only 1 tablet would be necessary to knock a person out. So on the night of October 23rd, 1997, Anu hosts a dinner party, a farewell party of sorts. Joe was there, and the guests mingled, ate, drank wine. It was supposed to be just like this casual event, even kind of like a celebration. But behind closed doors, this was something far more sinister. Everybody at this party knew the purpose of the party, that Anu was going to take her life and take Joe with her. And yet all of these people came, celebrated, and just watched it all happen out of morbid curiosity. The only one at this party that was in the dark about what the party actually was for, what the purpose of it was, what was to come, was Joe. It was all just entertainment for all of these guests. And Anu was really happy all night, loving towards Joe. Some people thought that that meant that she hadn't been serious earlier and that it had all been a joke. She did love drama and she was an attention seeker. But even if that was the case and these people thought that it was a joke, why did nobody tell Joe? Like, I just cannot imagine all of these people coming to this party, knowing the purpose of the party, seeing Joe and knowing what is in his future and just choosing not to say anything and let it all just play out. So eventually everybody left. Joe was still alive at this point, but Medhavi was telling people that this is still going to go down tonight. Like, this is still happening. At some point later in the evening, Anu crushed up 3 tablets of the Rohypnol and put it in Joe's coffee, and it knocked him right out. Then Anu injected Joe with the pre-filled heroin syringe. Unfortunately, the heroin had congealed in the syringe, so she wasn't able to, push it through and actually get it into his body. Now, here's the thing. Joe was not a drug user. He didn't know that he had been dosed. He became groggy and disoriented, and when he woke up the next morning, he thought that he just had a bad hangover, not knowing that he had been drugged the night before. So he just went to work the next day, and it was like nothing had even happened. So what does Anu do? She sets up a second farewell party for herself and Joe on October 24th. And again, invites friends and acquaintances. She tells them the plan and that it's for sure happening that night. And again, nobody does anything. Joe didn't even know the party was happening until he got home from work and found people at the house. But he was a gracious host and he just rolled with it, chatting with the guests and enjoying this party. You would think that through the course of the night, when he's having all of these conversations with people, that somebody would have said something. Even just warning him, dude, your girlfriend is crazy. Even if they didn't believe it themselves, it just shocks me that nobody thought to say anything. So the party went off without a hitch, and people stayed till the early hours of the morning. Medhavi left at around 6 a.m., and she was the last to leave. So between 6:30 and 9:30 a.m., one of the party guests, a girl named Tanya, said that she was going to tell Joe that he had been drugged with 3 Rohypnol tablets the night before. So Anu and Medhavi went to another one of the guests' house, which was a man named Leonard, and they told him that Anu had given him the tablets. They owned up to that, but it was just to put him to sleep so that he wouldn't have to see Anu end her life or try to talk her out of it. So the 3 of them, Anu, Medhavi, and this other guy named Leonard, were able to talk Tanya out of telling Joe. At the second farewell party, Joe is drugged again, and this time he ends up sleeping 15 hours. What's unclear to me is why Anu didn't inject him with the heroin right after he, went to sleep. She waits all of these hours. It makes me wonder if maybe, she was having second thoughts, trying to decide if she was actually going to do it. So he does wake up. But after he woke up, Anu called Medhavi to come over. This was about 10 p.m. the following night. And they ended up getting into a fight when Anu actually accused Medhavi of having been the one to drug Joe. Joe's kind of suspicious at this point. I just slept 15 hours. I feel horrible. So Anu throws her friend Medhavi under the bus and blames her. So they get in a fight and she leaves. And after she left, Anu crushed up more Rohypnol into Joe's coffee. And after he'd passed out, she injected him with the heroin. The next morning, October 26th, Anu went to Medhavi's house at around 8 a.m. and woke her up, brought her back to the house, and Medhavi saw Joe asleep on the bed. But he was still breathing. Anu drove them to an ATM, and Medhavi took out $250, which she gave to Anu, and they ended up getting in another fight, and Medhavi walked home by herself, while Anu went back to Mr. T's house and bought another $250 worth of heroin. Anu starts calling Medhavi a bunch of times, and she eventually agrees that she'll come back to Anu and Joe's house, and she saw Joe unconscious at the bed. She left and went back to Leonard's house and told him that Anu told her that the night before, Joe had told Anu he was going to leave her. So she roofied him again and injected him with heroin to try and kill him. This is just wild, you guys. I hope you're following this. At around 12 p.m., Anu called the classmate that she got the Rohypnol from and told her that she'd given Joe the Rohypnol, injected him with the heroin, and his lips were still slightly blue. So she begged this classmate that she got the drugs from to come over and help her revive Joe. Maybe she was having second thoughts. I don't know. But this classmate is like, nope, I'm not getting involved any further than I already am. And she told her, you need to call the paramedics. Anu's response to this was she didn't want to call the paramedics because Joe was going to be mad at her for drugging him. But the classmate convinced her that an angry boyfriend was better than a murder charge. So eventually, Anu calls the paramedics, and this call was all over the place. She went from being calm to being hysterical, and she seemed evasive. When they asked what address they should send the ambulance to, she would try to redirect the conversation to something else. She actually even gave them the wrong address and the wrong name until she eventually finally gave them the right address. But they lost a lot of time with all of her antics during this call. The operator told her to give him mouth to mouth, and when the paramedics eventually arrived, he was unconscious on the bed, naked from the waist down. He had brown liquid and blood all around his mouth. He had a bloated stomach. They immediately began trying to resuscitate him, while Anu just paced and begged the paramedics to save him, basically just putting on a show. She told them that she had given him the Rohypnol and injected him with the heroin to, quote, put him to sleep so he wouldn't see her end her own life. And despite their best efforts, they couldn't save Joe, and he died later that night. Anu was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning, and she seemed just hysterical. But the investigators noted that there was no tears. She never needed a tissue. It all just seemed like a big show. Joe's family, after they had been notified of his death, had to go to the morgue to identify Joe. And as soon as they pulled the sheet down, Maria, his mom, just collapsed. His whole family was just devastated. An autopsy and toxicology report were done, and it was confirmed that the Rohypnol and heroin were the cause of his death. There was so much heroin in his system that they couldn't tell if he had been injected with one huge dose or multiple smaller doses, but he was likely injected with one dose at 3 a.m. on Sunday, October 26th, and then another one 8 hours later. During the investigation, they found Joe's planner, and on Monday, October 27th, he had written, quote, prepare to move, end quote, with an arrow to the time 6 p.m. and the word urgent written next to it. His luggage was also missing, so investigators believe that he was actually preparing to leave Anu and move out. The police also searched Medhavi's house, and they found Rohypnol, alcohol wipes, pamphlets about arteries, veins, and drugs, and used syringe packets in her room. They also found in her room Anu's torn-up diary, and that showed that she had been super depressed and planning Joe's death for quite some time. So Medhavi was also arrested and charged with murder, attempted murder, unlawful slaying, I've never heard that one before, and administering a stupefying drug. So 3 days later, her parents paid her bail, and she just had to remain under her parents' supervision. And they initially were going to try Medhavi and Anu together, but they later abandoned that idea, saying that the evidence against Anu made it so unfair for Medhavi and her trial that they ordered them to have separate trials. And they both chose to exercise their right to have a judge-only trial. I guess that's something in Australia. That's not something that I'm super familiar with, but the judge was going to decide their fate. So Anu's trial began on the 22nd of March, 1999, and at trial, Anu Singh pled not guilty by reason of diminished responsibility, and her defense hinged on her mental state. Basically, I think that would be comparable in the United States to not guilty by reason of insanity. They claimed that she had an undiagnosed borderline personality disorder and major depressive disorder. Her defense argued that her perception of reality was distorted, that she believed that Joe had been controlling or poisoning her, and that her actions were the result of mental illness, not murder. The prosecution, on the other hand, argued that her crimes were cold, calculated, and premeditated, and that she had been planning this for months. They also claimed that if she was as depressed as the defense claimed, she would have gone through with the plan to kill herself as well. They presented her diary as evidence and said that it proved that she was rational, didn't exhibit any signs of mental illness, and was capable of developing and maintaining normal relationships. They also argued that she watched him die over multiple days and that she was very evasive when contacting the emergency services, which eventually prevented him from getting any kind of medical help. So the court finally decided to accept a lesser charge of manslaughter. She was sentenced to just 4 years with a minimum parole term of 2 years, backdated to the time of Joe's death, which meant she would be eligible for parole in just 2 years. Can you guys even believe that? She kills her boyfriend at a dinner party, murders him, and not just murders him in a very cruel and drawn out process, and she gets 2 years. Joe's parents were furious, and his mother actually began yelling at Anu in the courtroom, calling her a demon, calling her the devil, and she's quoted as saying, quote, 4 years. Is that all my son is worth? 4 years, end quote. She told reporters outside the courtroom that she believed that Anu should have been sentenced to death by hanging. So Madhavi's trial has now started on December 10th in 1999, and she pled not guilty. The defense said that when she saw Joe in the bed, practically dying, and she told Anu that she didn't want anything to do with the plan anymore, her duty of care ended. She wasn't responsible for anything after that. Now, forget that she helped purchase the drugs, that she helped to make this whole plan. She was researching suicide and assisted suicide. Forget all of that. The judge found her not guilty and she was free to go. Anu ended up serving 2 years. She worked in the prison library, attended therapy, and started taking medication for a range of mental illnesses, such as OCD, anxiety, and depression. Now, get this. While she was in jail, she was actually granted day release to attend classes at the University of Sydney, where she got her master's degree in criminology. So this woman is serving jail time for murder, and she not only has to serve 2 more years past what she's already served, she gets to, go to school, get a master's degree, hang out in the prison library. Like, this just blows my mind. After serving her 2 years, she was put on parole, but she violated her parole when she was caught smoking weed, and she went back to jail for a whopping 3 more months. In 2009, she was actually awarded a doctorate degree from the University of Sydney's law faculty for a thesis that she wrote about women who commit crimes. This is a 100,000-word thesis where she discusses women in crime and her own involvement in Joe's death. Joe's parents think that this was just a desperate attempt for her to try to stay relevant and keep her name in the news. She now lives in Sydney, and she's in a more serious relationship with an inmate that she met while she was in jail. Madhavi has since changed her name and moved to the United States, where she lives with her husband and her children. Anu has given interviews about her past, and she said that she still struggles to understand exactly what happened. In 2017, she appeared on a show called A Public Affair, and she issued an apology to Joe's parents. In that same program, Maria, Joe's mom, rejected that apology, calling Anu the devil. Don't blame you. Joe Cinque should still be here today. He should have had the chance to grow old, to pursue his dreams, to fall in love again if he wanted to. His life was just stolen. Not just by a needle, but by a chilling kind of apathy that surrounded him in his final days. Joe's parents were devastated, and his mother, Maria Cinque, has since become a vocal critic of the Australian legal system. In her view, justice was never served, and I can't say I blame her. I agree, justice was definitely not served in this case. How could somebody who admitted to planning a death, following through with it, hosting a party while doing it, only serve 4 years? There's also something chilling about a crime that isn't just a sudden act of rage or a spur-of-the-moment mistake. There's something just more disturbing to it when it's planned and it's calculated. And when it unfolds in the presence of others who chose silence over intervention. All of those people, if any of them had stepped up and done the right thing, this whole thing could have been avoided. What happened to Joe Cinque wasn't just the story of one person's unraveling. It was the story of a community of young, educated people who, for reasons we might never understand, just chose not to act. So what is justice when so many stand by? What is accountability when the system only sees fragments of what truly happens? And what does it say about us when someone can throw a dinner party for murder? Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. This is actually, I've listened to a lot of true crime podcasts, and this is actually a story that I had never heard before, probably because it takes place in Australia and I'm in the United States. But I know that I have some listeners in Australia. So if you are one of those listeners and you've heard this story before or you have any thoughts, I would love to hear about them. Even if you're not in Australia, I'd love to hear your thoughts over on my Instagram on the post for this episode. And I will be back next week with another new episode for you. In the meantime, I'll keep snooping so you don't have to. This is She Investigates, signing off.